was desperately afraid of what was going to happen. I thought to myself, I'm married almost 40 years. If I go home and sit in the rocking chair, I'll be divorced in 6 months. Can't do that. So I went to the intermediate unit, and by the way, I did not get a retirement package like some people did. I have to be careful about that. But I did go to the executive director, and I said to him, you know, most schools don't do a whole lot about teaching about our local history and heritage. I had already done several different kinds of programs, local history days for the intermediate unit. When I mentioned to you about my office being decorated at the school, going back about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I had a grade 3, 4, 5 building. In most schools in the state of Pennsylvania, there is a lot of state history and some local history done at the 4th grade level. And I'm proud to say we did a lot at Wallenpaupack. We took kids on a bus tour around the school district to one of our old one-room schoolhouses where I was principal of at one time, the town of Hawley, and we'll talk a lot about its connection to the valley over here, to Dorflinger Glass. How many have been to Dorflinger Glass up there in White Mills to Sanctuary? Great place, isn't it? Yeah. I was at the concerts the last couple of weeks. Great concerts. We also started a local history club at our high school, and I'm currently working with Valley View and Abington and a couple of places down here to get local history clubs started. Bottom line is, there's some work being done at the elementary level, little to nothing being done at most high schools. Not just here, but anywhere in the country. So when I talked to the executive director at the IU, as soon as I got finished with my speech, he said, you're hired, you can work part-time. So I am working 2 or 3 days a week, and I have been to every museum, every historical society, and I'm here tonight, there's another one, and every educational institution, from Milford on the east, to Montrose up north, to Luzerne County Historical Society, and just about everywhere in between. And my goal is, I want to see local history taught in our high schools. So that's my part-time job, and I'm on a mission, I'm on a crusade, and whatever you can do to support that, I would appreciate. And what I keep trying to tell the teachers in these schools, this is a marriage made in heaven. If you get out and have your kids doing oral history projects, going and interviewing all of you middle-aged citizens here, and look around you. This is our dilemma, folks. I won't ask the question who's under 40 here, but anyway. Oh, there we go. We got one anyway. And there's another. We got 2. If there's anybody else I offended, I apologize. But this is our concern. We're the ones who are interested. We need to get our younger students interested. Another fact is, what happens? There's nothing to do, nowhere to go. All right? Again, this is the principal and the teacher. My questions. The 2 best $5 bills in northeastern Pennsylvania, there might be 6 now. How many have been down the coal mine? How many have been on the trolley ride? Am I exaggerating? Are they not the 2 best $5 bills that you can spend? Might be $6 now. If you haven't been on the trolley ride, you have to do it. And the Lackawanna Heritage Valley Authority, LHVA, that has a lot to do with the rail trails going up and down the valley and lots of other things. They are very active in trying to promote this community. We had a pretty good representation when I had you raise your hands here a minute ago. When I do this kind of a talk up in the country, I don't get anywhere near the hands that I see here. And I keep trying to encourage people. We have lots of wonderful things the other side of the mountain too. How many of you have been to Great Towers in Milford? I'm impressed. Good job. One of the great resources in our area. For those of you who don't know, former Governor Pinchot, a 3-story French Renaissance masterpiece in Milford, and all of the artifacts in the building. And I think even more fascinating than Gifford was his wife Cornelia, one of the original women suffragettes. Take a ride in Milford, take your spouse, your friend, your significant other, and go and spend a day in Milford, have lunch at the Water Wheel Restaurant, beautiful, I don't know, must be 28 feet in diameter water wheel, and food is great there, and then you go to Great Towers, you'll have a great time. But we're here tonight specifically We're going to try to connect some of the dots for you. The gravity railroads. Well, we can't start with the gravity railroads. We have to go back to the Delaware and Hudson Canal. Well, why was the Delaware and Hudson Canal built? And we have to go back to our greatest commodity here in the valley, which was what? Coal, of course. It all started with coal. It all started really in the early 1800s when a guy in downtown Wilkes-Barre in his tavern discovered the secret of burning coal indoors. Who remembers his name?
Jesse Fell.
Jesse Fell. One of my fascinations, where do the names of our towns come from? Well, we know where Fell came from now, don't we? Jesse Fell in downtown Wilkes-Barre discovered the secret of a grate. It was kind of a, I don't know, actually looked like a step, I think. And iron grate. You could not burn coal successfully in a fireplace. All you got was smoke, and anthracite coal is extremely hard to ignite. So, didn't do much good. The Indians found it on the ground. They'd build their campfires on the ground. They'd catch some of the outcroppings. Didn't help. Jesse Fell comes along, early 1800s. I want to say there's even a year, 1808, if I remember correctly. He discovers the secret of burning coal indoors. But now we have another problem. Let's go back and tell one other story before the 1800s. Of course, Columbus comes over 1492. King Charles II, 1662, gives all the land between the 41st and 42nd parallel from ocean to ocean, except other land owned by Christian kings, to the state of Connecticut. 19 years later, in 1681, he gives what is the current boundary of Pennsylvania to whom? William Penn. So 1662, where we are sitting right now, he gives to Connecticut, and in 1681 he gives it to Pennsylvania. Who owns this land?
Connecticut. They purchased it from the Indians. And
There he is. No, they didn't purchase it from the Indians.
they most certainly did.
No. This land was given to the Connecticut settlers, to the governor of Connecticut, because King Charles II owed a debt to the governor of Connecticut. So it may have been purchased before that, but in fact, King Charles II gave this land to the governor of Connecticut. What happens when two siblings both claim ownership of the same thing? For over 100 years, there were wars fought between the Connecticut settlers, and by the way, probably 98% of the original settlers who came here were from Connecticut, not Pennsylvania. They came over, they settled in the Wyoming Valley. Quick funny story if I can, if you've heard it before, I apologize. So they come over and they settle in the Wyoming Valley, several wars back and forth with the Indians. Finally, Pennsylvania folks come up, wars back and forth between those two. Connecticut gets smart. Even back in those days, there was politics. So the governor of Connecticut says, you know what? We have to lay claim to that land over there in Pennsylvania. I know what we're going to do. We're going to create a new county over there on the other side of New York. Now, why wasn't New York involved? Remember, the charter was all land between the 41st and the 42nd parallel, except other land owned by Christian kings. Who owned New York State? No, the Dutch. Very good. See, she gets an A in history. It was the Dutch who owned New York, and they had a Christian king. So, okay, this land is going to be called a new county. We're going to call it Westmoreland County. That's an odd name. Say it slowly. It was the Westmoreland County of the state of Connecticut. Weren't they shrewd? All right. How many people who here is familiar with Wilkes-Barre? What's the most prestigious club to belong to in downtown Wilkes-Barre? I can't hear you. The Westmoreland Club. It's all connected. I'm just intrigued with some of that stuff. All right. So we have this fighting going on, and it only gets settled finally in the Treaty of Trenton, 1782. After the Revolutionary War, they petition George Washington, and they say, we're so sick and tired of this bickering back and forth. Settle this once and for all. George Washington says, the Treaty of Trenton belongs to Pennsylvania. Did that settle it? Not exactly. There were still some skirmishes and some paper battles, but for the most part it did. So we get to the early 1800s. We have Jesse Fell, 1808. And then we have these two brothers from down in Philadelphia, Maurice and William Wirtz. And they start traveling up north, and they said, you know, that guy Jesse Fell, we've been given all this land here in northeastern Pennsylvania. They got this thing called coal up there. Well, already there were attempts to use this coal as a commodity, shipped down to Philadelphia by extravagant means. The southern coal fields could, of course, go down the Schuylkill River. And if I had a big whiteboard or chalkboard, I'd draw all this out with my great artistic endeavors and being facetious. But, so the coal from the southern coal fields could go down the Schuylkill River. The middle coal fields could go down the Lehigh River to Easton, down the Delaware River to Philadelphia. We tried sending it down the Susquehanna River, and by elaborate means over from Harrisburg over toward Philadelphia. They even built something called the North Branch Canal, which was an abject failure. That's another story for another day. But the Wirtz brothers, they have an idea. If we can get this commodity called coal to one of the two biggest cities in America, of course Philadelphia was one, the other biggest city was New York. It wasn't bigger than Philadelphia at that time, but it was getting there. If we can get this coal to New York City, we're going to make a lot of money. So here's what we're going to do. There had already been built something called the Erie Canal up in northern New York State, from the Albany area over to the Great Lakes. So the Wirtz brothers, they go and hire two engineers from that canal called Benjamin Wright and a guy by the name of John Jervis. Guess what town's named after him? Port Jervis. So they get these two engineers down and they say, hey, let's build a canal. Well, if you can follow me, we'll go kind of backwards. Of course, New York City is down here at the bottom of the Hudson River. So you've got the Hudson River, obviously very navigable, up to a place called Kingston, or formerly called Rondout, New York. You have Rondout Creek, Never Sink Creek down to Port Jervis, the Delaware River up to Lackawaxen, and the Lackawaxen River up through Hawley and all the way to Homestead. Canal is 108 miles long, has 108 locks in it. And my fourth grade kids, I could never convince them that there wasn't a lock every mile. That's just the way it had to be, and that's a fourth grade mindset. Of course, it wasn't true. So they built the canal to Homestead. It's 108 miles long. Did they ever find coal in Homestead?
No.
No, never any coal. It was in the valley. And the closest point to Homestead was the place called Carbondale, which before that was known as,
Ragged Island.
what was it?
Ragged Island.
Coal.
Yeah, and something Barrens. I can't think, I forget the name now.
Where? Ragged Island is true.
Okay,
There's another name.
it had a couple other names. So, all right, we have to get from Carbondale to Homestead. So what are we going to do? We're going to be creative. We're going to get this guy, Benjamin Wright and John Jervis, and we're going to bring along another guy, another famous engineer by the name of James Archibald. Wow, where do we get all these names from? So we build, they come up with the idea. What goes up must come down. So they build this gravity railroad. How many have eaten at the Binmar restaurant in Carbondale? That's where it started, right behind that Binmar restaurant. And if you ever do a walking tour of Carbondale, or eat at the Binmar, they got some of the pictures up there. And by the way, another great place to visit, Carbondale Historical Society, 3rd floor of City Hall up there. It starts right behind the Binmar, and we build this gravity railroad through use of drums. And where's my buddy Jane? Tell me if I'm wrong. They start by using chains, which don't work. They go to hemp rope, and then they finally, John Augustus Roebling, we'll talk more about him, they go to wire rope, and they're pulling these cars up by playing level at the top of the mountain, 900 feet, and they coast, not all the way, they coast to Homestead, a couple hills in the way. How many of you have driven by Keene Pond up there in Waymore? You've seen the stone bridges there, part of the gravity railroad right there. So we built the Delaware and Hudson Gravity Railroad initially for approximately 16, 17 miles from Carbondale to Honesdale. And we built the Gravity Railroad loaded track, light track. So you have basically a circular track system. Jay Varco is here from Waymart, and hold your hand up there. Wonderful Gravity Railroad Museum in the old building right there in downtown Waymart. If you haven't been there, you have to go visit. It's very successful. The Wirtz brothers are very successful, and there were two other brothers, by the way, but Maurice and William were the two main brothers involved. So they decided to extend it. They extended from Carbondale. By the way, this started in 1823. They're building the canal and the railroad between 1823 and 1829. So it's extended from Carbondale on down to a place called White Oak Run, which is now known as Archbald.
Bird's Eye Breaker.
Excuse me?
The Bird's Eye Breaker.
Okay, Bird's Eye Breaker. And then from White Oak Run down to Valley Junction, which today is? My understanding is all of them, now, from what I've read. But again, part of this history is you don't always agree on all this stuff, so that's what makes it interesting too. So it comes down to Valley Junction, and then eventually, by the time they build it down there, there's actually some steam railroad in the area. Well, let's talk about steam railroads. Not connected to gravity directly, but we have the very first steam road, or at least claim to have the first steam railroad in America, that traveled from Honesdale, Pennsylvania, August 8th, 1829, from Honesdale to Sealyville. And the name of that train was? Stourbridge Line. How many of you have been to the Wayne County Historical Society in Honesdale? Magnificent, magnificent replica of the Stourbridge Line. And about 2 years ago, they put a $700,000 addition onto that historical society. So this is another place you have to go and visit. Take your wife, your husband, your significant other, your children, your parents. You go up to Honesdale, you spend the day, you have breakfast or lunch, and you visit the Historical Society, you walk up and down Main Street. I promise you, you won't regret that. Okay, 1829. Now here's where I get really confused. And I have several books around here that kind of allude to this. The late 1840s. The Wirtzes are making money hand over fist. But we need more coal. We need coal to get down to the city and up to Albany and on its way up to Montreal and every place else. Stourbridge Line was built, by the way, it was an abject failure. The Delaware and Hudson Canal Company they bought 4 steam engines. We know for a fact 2 of them got here to America. We're not sure what happened to the other 2. So the Stourbridge Line comes up on a canal boat to Honesdale. Depending upon what book you read, they wanted the Stourbridge Line to be built to a capacity of 4 tons to ride on the hemlock ties and the strap rail on top. And it was 5 tons, it was too heavy, really wasn't used again. Lost my train of thought for a second, I'll get back to it. All right, so late 1840s, we need more coal. All right, here's what we're going to do. I really get confused here. We're going to take a member of the board of directors of the Delaware and Hudson Canal Company. His name was Irad Hall. Name ring a bell? Irad Hall, town of Hall. And we're going to take another guy, the chief engineer at that time of the Delaware and Hudson Canal Company, James Archibald. Okay, you 2 guys, there's lots more coal down the line. We want you to head down there to the Pittston area, a place called Port Griffin. We want you to build a second, separate and distinct gravity railroad. Again, it gets into interlocking names. The Washington Coal Company, the Luzerne and Wyoming Company. I don't understand. I read it. It's like Enron. You know, it's incestuous if you get these companies involved. The names are there for a couple of years, 1845 to 1849. Eventually, they all become known as the Pennsylvania Coal Companies. Pennsylvania Coal Company builds basically from Pittston up through where Montage is today, up through Dunmore, up over Music Mountain, Mount Cobb, Lake Ariel, Gravity, Hoadley's, down into Hall. From what I've read, the longest gravity railroad in the country, approximately 47 miles. Again, the number changes depending upon what book you read. Loaded track up, light track back, sometimes right next to each other, sometimes crossing over each other. You can see pictures in some of these books, and sometimes miles apart from each other. And there's a big map there. I'm not sure if I can lift that up, but there are pictures of it here. And again, you can see they're right next to each other here, but they go around different sides of the lake in this picture, if you can see it. And feel free to look at the lake.
What lake is that?
Oh, what lake is that? Lake Henry. I have to take my glasses off to read that small print. Old age. Very successful. But here's what I don't understand. The Pennsylvania Coal Company and the Delaware and Hudson, they hated each other. From the day it was built, they never got along. I don't understand why. The way I read it, the Delaware and Hudson Canal Company told these guys to go out and build it so we can get more coal in our canal at Hawley. Well, what were the problems? Pennsylvania Coal Company Gravity Railroad gets built. They go to put their coal into the canal basin at Hawley. How many of you eaten at Settlers? Oh, you got to take your spouse, significant other. Great restaurant downtown Hawley, directly across the street from the canal basin in downtown Hawley. A lot of boats for the Delaware and Hudson Canal Company were built in Hawley. And by the way, I lived in downtown Hawley for 31 years, up till 4 years ago. I moved a couple miles outside of town. And it's a great little town, and you can see a lot of remnants of the canal and the railroads there. As a matter of fact, we still have the Stourbridge line going from Homestead to Hawley to Lackawaxen. So we have the Canal Company Basin in downtown Hawley. You can still see the walls, or a wall of the canal in that basin in Hawley. The D&H charged in the mines of the Pennsylvania Coal Company exorbitant rates in order to move their coal down the canal to New York City. They didn't like that. The Delaware and Hudson Company also complained that the quality of coal that was being sent over the mountain from the Pennsylvania Coal Company wasn't adequate or wasn't of the proper BTU heat sufficient for what was being sold. They hated each other. So all this bickering goes on. The Pennsylvania Coal Company Gravity Railroad was completed and started operation in 1850. Life gets a little more interesting and intriguing. What else started in 1850? Not connected to the gravity railroads at all, but the first major Class I railroad in America, the New York, Lake Erie, and Western Railroad, commonly known as the Erie Railroad, is chartered in the state of New York. Now, the original charter of the Erie Railroad was that it had to be built entirely in New York State. It was going to go from Piermont on the Hudson, just above New York City, to Dunkirk, New York, just outside of Buffalo. Why was it built? Because the southern tier cities, Binghamton, Elmira, Johnson City, Horseheads, they said, hey, we're getting shafted. All that traffic is going on the Erie Canal up there. We need something to sustain the southern tier of New York. So since this new contraption called the steam railroad is being built, we want it built in our backyard. New York State says, okay, we're going to grant a charter to the Erie Railroad. Has to be built in New York State. They start at Piermont on the Hudson. They get over to Port Jervis, and what happens? The Delaware and Hudson Canal is already on the New York side from Port Jervis up to Lackawaxen. They don't have a choice. They have to cross into Pennsylvania at a place called Mill Rift. They come up through Lackawaxen, and they cross back over into New York State by Narrowsburg. They stay along the Delaware River up until they get to the Hancock area, and and they have to cross over back into Pennsylvania at Susquehanna over the famous what? Starooka Viaduct, that masterpiece of railroad engineering, and then on its way to Binghamton and on its way to New York. Well, by the way, a separate side note of that, the railroad was built with 4 days to spare. The contract was it had to be finished by December 31st, 1849. The Erie Railroad, they hired these brothers from a place called Slocum Hollow. And they said to these brothers who had an iron forge, and at that time their most famous product was nails. And they were terrible nails. They broke, they were brittle, they didn't work. But nonetheless, the Erie Railroad still hired these two brothers, George and Selden Scranton, and said, we need you to build T-rail for our railroad, and you have to deliver it to Mill Riff, Pond Eddy, Lackawaxen, Mast Hope, so on. They delivered it, the Scrantons made their fortune, they eventually got a town named after them, and that's, again, an indirect part of all this. Getting back to the Gravity Railroad, and it's hard to talk just about that because all these other things happen. So what happened was, even though the Pennsylvania Coal Company Gravity Railroad was built in 1850, 15 years later, 1865, now remember the Erie Railroad's operating for 15 years now, the Erie Railroad says, you know what? They're having all this trouble up there in Hawley between the Pennsylvania Coal Company and the D&H. Here's what we're going to do. The canal's on one side of the Lackawaxen River. We're going to build a branch of our Erie Railroad from Lackawaxen to Hawley. And we're going to call it the Erie and Wyoming Valley branch of the Erie Railroad. We're going to build it to Hawley. So what do you think the Pennsylvania Coal Company does in 1865? We're not dumping our coal in your canal. We're giving our coal to the railroad. Relations only got worse between the two companies. And eventually there were lawsuits and there's stuff in the books here I don't understand. I read, and I can't fit it all in my mind. They hated each other. They didn't get along. Finally, in 1885, 20 years later, the Erie Railroads and the Pennsylvania Coal Company Gravity Railroad said, you know what, this is ridiculous. Why don't we just extend our Erie and Wyoming Valley Railroad? Here's what we're going to do. Even though there's a loaded track and a light track, we're going to build a third separate railroad bed because we can't go a single winter without having this coal coming out of the valley. We're going to build a third separate and distinct railroad bed from Hawley to Lake Erie, to Wimers, to Dunmore, to Scranton. And we all remember down there in Dunmore, you know, what was the Naples originally? That was the major building and repair shop of the Erie Railroad, where the tank is today in Dunmore. Remember going over by Billy's restaurant there, the Erie Railroad came over, curved around, and where did it end? Where did the Erie Railroad end in Scranton? Where? Nope. Where did it end? Your favorite restaurant? Cooper's. Where Cooper's is today. Did you ever ask yourself this question? Why do they have a railroad running around a seafood restaurant? And the reason is, it was the end of the line of the Erie and Wyoming Valley Railroad. That was it. You had the freight station and the passenger station. The passenger station is where the parking lot is today. And the freight station, well, the passenger station originally, but they separated later, is the old part of Cooper's. That was the railroad station. Obviously not the ship part. But again, another great question. Why did they have a railroad running around a seafood restaurant? Well, the Erie Railroad made a Y. Remember railroad parlance, a Y, a W-Y-E, in Dunmore. The right-hand Y went over through to Naples, down to Cooper's. The left-hand Y goes along East Mountain. All right, you're going down 81, right? Central City Expressway, Music Street. Next time you go over Music Street, see the railroad bridge on your left? That's part of the Erie Railroad. Went down along the mountainside, and if you're all going to take the trolley ride before October 31st, right? You take the trolley ride up, and the trolley ride, well, let me go a different way. get off at Davis Street, and if you go to the movie theater, you go over two sets of railroad tracks.
Yeah.
The first set was a part of the old Laurel line between Scranton and Wilkes-Barre. The second set, down where the trolley is today, it's all kind of gummed up, but that was the Erie Railroad. Went down through Montage, down through Avoca, and ended up down in Pittston. So there's your connection with the Gravity Railroad. So you've got, in 1885, you've got the separate line of the Erie and Wyoming Valley Railroad that took over and now completely eliminates the Pennsylvania Coal Company Gravity Railroad. The Delaware and Hudson Gravity Railroad operates their railroad and canal until 1898, when they finally see the writing on the wall, and the Delaware and Hudson now becomes a railroad company, a railway company, call it whatever you want. So they rip up, they stop operating their canal, but they take, if I remember correctly, Jane, tell me if I'm wrong, they operate a steam railroad from 1898 until about 1931? 31, up over the mountain. I have a question. How many of you have ever been on a gravity railroad? What's it called? I'll bet everybody in this room has been on a gravity railroad. What's it called? Roller coaster.
We had a farm to gravity railroad went through the pasture.
Yeah. I'm sure, I've had several people talk to me tonight about, living the other side of the mountain, or even this side really, where there's pasture land. You can find a lot of remnants. Another story. I sometimes think I'm the only person who remembers this story, so I'm going to, go
You
ahead.
mentioned that about not being able to get coal in the wintertime. Was the gravity railroad not able to function during?
Oh no, the gravity did. That's why Homestead, one of its known diplomas of Homestead, one of their claims to fame, was that they had the largest coal pile in the world here in Homestead. If you're familiar with Homestead, this is Main Street on the side of the hill there. They could still get coal up there in the wintertime, and they would stockpile, because what could not operate in the wintertime? The canal. The canal didn't operate basically, December, January, February, March. So they could still get coal over the mountain. And they did, particularly the Homestead. I don't read so much about it coming to Hawley, though. That poses another interesting question. Yes?
They had a large coal pile in Holly also.
They did, but nothing like Homestead, I don't think.
No, I've seen both pictures.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of people don't really understand that both the Erie and the Gravity ran this at the same time. A lot of people say that's impossible, but
Well, they could because it was a separate track.
yes, and I've seen pictures of it. It's the light track runs wherever 5 is.
Okay.
Plane 5. Track coming over here. There's pictures of plane 5. You see guys sitting on top of stone where it was going to carry the not the gravity, the Erie, and the gravity ran right underneath it.
Okay. Help me out here. I'm going to talk, one second. I want to think late 60s, early 70s. I want to see if anybody else remembers this besides me.
Is it 1900 or 18?
I need guys like that, right? You're out of here. No, 1960s, 1970s. I remember an attempt by the Lackawanna County Commissioners. And remember, there's this whole thing of the country and the valley, and it goes in both directions, so you take it all with a grain of salt. But I remember, I think, the Lackawanna County Commissioners at that time saying, you know what, we don't have a name for this yet, but wouldn't it be a great idea? That Erie Railroad went out of existence, if I remember right, in '57, from Hawley to Scranton. And they said, you know what, we're going to buy the existing roadbed at the Erie Railroad in Lackawanna County, and we're going to go up there to the Wayne County Commissioners and petition them, I keep forgetting, I'm sorry, and petition them and say, why don't we create a rail trail? That concept wasn't even evolved at that point. Let's create a rail trail from Scranton to Hawley. And at that time, I remember reading that the Wayne County Commissioners would not even give them the time of day. Does anybody else besides me remember that? No? Well, again, go ahead.
I do recall in that section of the, on the lot between Davis Street and the road that, where the Goodwill is at the top of Smooth Street there.
Yeah.
That, the Erie main line goes right through there.
Yeah.
It comes down along and goes down across the mountain there. In the mid-1970s, I can recall seeing repair trains up on there.
I don't remember that.
Well, see, I used to do a lot of hiking there.
Okay.
And I can recall, we used to hike along that, and in the mid-70s.
Okay. But if you think about it today, probably one of the most popular things in America today is the concept of rail trails, which we have right now. I remember when I was a kid walking from Jessup to Peckville, because the Favini Theater had closed in Jessup, so we had to go to Favini's in Peckville. And I remember the O&W there right along the river where Mid-Valley Plumbing is today. That was their station. And if you walk from Jessup to Peckville, of course, you've got the rail trail on the right there going up to Archibald on the old O&W trail. But coming to the left, that all got built upon. And, you get into that whole thing of after how many years does land revert to its previous owner? And for the folks up in the country, there's a little bit of a mindset of, hey, this was originally my land, you're not using it for a railroad anymore, therefore I want my land back. And I'm not saying anybody is all right or all wrong in this. What I'm saying is, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a rail trail from Scranton to Hawley today? We're trying to finish the rail trail. You've got it going great from Forest City up to Mount Ararat and up to New York State. And LHVA, the Lackawanna Heritage Valley Authority, is doing a good job, section by section, of eventually Carbondale all the way down to Wilkes-Barre is their goal. Yes?
In the early 1970s, Ed Spears got with the Sierra Club,
Okay.
and we met up there in Bay Park, in the Coal Museum.
Right.
And a guy by the name of Don Cianga from the Sierra Club was all for it, but the problem they have is if they left the trail in the deed for the people, and I fell, then people would be liable for my actions. And it blew it. We almost, I say we almost, we were about that close.
Well, you get into that whole liability thing, and you get into the NIMBY thing, and again, uh-oh. Bingo!
Say hello.
Yes, sir.
That was not a right of way though. That was, they owned that property. That's why the trail didn't exist. The guy went in and bought that property. He bought it.
Well,
Then after
bought
he
the
bought-
Wayne County, I believe. Did he buy Lackawanna
No, he
too?
bought it from the Erie Railroad. He bought every bit of that land. He bought.
Okay.
Then he went and he sold it to the contractors, because I know contractors that were buying the ballast off it so much per mile.
Yeah.
And he sold the ballast. Then after he sold the ballast, he sold the property back to not to the original owners.
But to
Whoever wanted to buy that property, they could buy it. But that Pennsylvania gravity, when they put the Erie in, that's on the empty track from Pittston to 84.
Probably right.
Okay.
When you come up alongside the Elmhurst Reservoir, when you're running alongside the reservoir, that is the empty track. You
Okay.
look just before you get to 84, you can see where the gravity actually splits off to go to the 21, which was the 21 pole. And that's where it turned off and went through Wimmers and started a new route.
And, one of the things, I am not an expert on the Pennsylvania Coal Company Gravity Railroad. A guy named Sal Mecca, if anybody of you knows Sal, I think he knows much more about it than I do. I often say I'm a fountain of minutia. I know a little bit about a lot, about the whole, but when you get into the real specifics, I have not walked the entire Gravity Railroad. I've walked some of it. I've walked a lot of it up in the Hawley area, since that's where I live now, but I haven't walked it down here. Another guy who does some neat walking on the trails because of his job at the River Conservancy is Bernie Burrow. And sometimes in the fall, you'll see that Bernie will do different walks on the mountains in our area. So he's another guy that you might get connected with.
Who chartered the Pennsylvania Gravity Railroad?
The original charter, may I see that book for a second? I'm sorry.
Was that
The
Pennsylvania?
Washington Coal Company, along with, because I was rereading this last night, it gets so complicated.
Yeah, but the state would have to charter it.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Now,
Yeah,
the
okay.
gravity railroad that you're talking about, the D&H gravity railroad, still exists legally because it was never abandoned.
We know that's an
The New
interesting
York-
thought.
The New York State Charter has nothing to do with Pennsylvania.
Okay, you know, in terms of all this gas drilling that's going on,
Yeah.
going on now, there's a lot of people that, you know, were dead and buried, but in trust and whatever, who owns that land underneath, and that's coming up a lot right now. It gets in here into the Washington Coal Company, it gets into the Luzerne and Wyoming Company, and these companies existed only for 3 or 4 years,
Yeah.
between 1845 and 1850, until it all got turned over to the Pennsylvania Coal Company. It is, this, by the way, about 10 years ago, a guy came into my office up in Hawley, and he said, you know, Mr. Kennedy, I understand you have a few things on railroads and coal mine in the area. I'm doing my master's thesis at the University of Scranton, specifically on the Pennsylvania Coal Company Gravity Railroad. And he has written this wonderful 129-page document about the Pennsylvania Coal Company Gravity Railroad. Now, speaking of that, and you know, if you want to get into Pennsylvania gravity, a lady by the name of T.C. Connolly, Mary Teresa Connolly from Dunmore, has written, and I know she sometimes speaks on the Gravity Railroad. This is available at your local historical societies. A lot of books that I have up here are connected with the, you can buy at the different historical societies. Okay, so you've got the Delaware and Hudson goes out in 1898. You've got the Pennsylvania Coal Company Gravity Railroad that goes out of existence in 1885 and is then taken over by the Erie and Wyoming Valley branch of the Erie Railroad. That branch, if I understand, if I remember correctly, went out of existence about 1957. The tracks were torn up. Anybody familiar with Seika up there? Anybody remember the double-span steel bridge that went over the tracks there? What were there, 5 or 6 tracks in that yard?
It was a Seiko
At the
yard.
Leo's gas station?
One of the reasons they put the Seiko yard in is when they built the gravity railroad, there was a lot of fills that they had to fill in. And they would take trees and they would prop the tracks up, sometimes 80 feet in the air. They would bring the cars out and they would dump. The fine coal would be dumped off the end of these tracks as fills. Well, after the gravity railroad stopped, a lot of in that area, they were horse and buggy. They would go and they were scavenging this coal, and at that yard in Seiko, they brought thousands of tons of coal down and put it into the main railroad cars where they scavenged it off the gravity from these big long fills.
By the way, getting back to the D&H, originally the D&H Gravity Railroad was primarily built on stilts. It wasn't built on land. And again, if you see different pictures, built on stilts 4 or 6 feet high and operated, that's how they operated their gravity railroad. A lot of history connected with Hawley and Homestead. And I always like to say, from my reading, Hawley and Dunmore are really sister cities. Because if you did well in Hawley, you got promoted to the big time in Dunmore. So there are names in Dunmore that are really indigenous to Hawley. And again, getting back to the beginning, who built the gravity railroads? Primarily the Germans and the Irish. Everything that I read, they were the original worker bees, if you want to call them that. They were brought over. Did they get along? Not particularly. A couple of other side stories connected with the gravity railroad. Originally, when the Delaware and Hudson Canal was built, Homestead to Hawley down to Lackawaxen. How many of you have been to Lackawaxen? Yeah, okay, so you have a perspective. The Lackawaxen River enters the Delaware River, obviously, is great. Originally, the canal boats went directly across the Delaware River. Well, that caused a problem. You had the lumber, and again, lumber was a major industry in this area. Think, you know, early 1800s. Coal is just getting to start. So lumber is the main source, not only of fuel, this is where you built your ships from. And a little side story again, there's a little village just above Lackawaxen called Mast Hope.
Right.
Their claim to fame is, why is it called Mast Hope? Their claim is that the original mast of the USS Constitution came from Mast Hope. Is that history? Is that heritage? Is it fact? I don't know. It's kind of like the infamous flag that sits at the Pike County Historical Society in Milford, which they claim is the American flag that Abraham Lincoln's head rested on when he was killed at Fort Theater. I'm not sure that's ever been proven, but it's a great story. Getting back, so the lumber is coming down, and you've probably all seen pictures. You know, they tie these huge rafts of lumber together. They come down, and what do? They crash into the coal boats coming across, and you know those damn Irish. My name's Kennedy, so I can say that. Boom, boom, boom. Delaware and Hudson Canal Company, which by the way was considered one of the most forward-looking enterprises in America. One of their claims to fame was, when they originally built the Delaware and Hudson Canal Company, claim to fame, history not necessarily fact, was that it was the first $1 million private enterprise in America. I'm not sure that can be proven, but they like to claim that. So the Delaware and Hudson Canal Company says, you know what? We got this problem over there at the Delaware River. We have to figure out something to do. There's this guy building bridges out in Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. His name is John Augustus Roebling. You know, he's got this new concept of taking wire rope and twirling it around and creating thicker and thicker rope, and by twirling it around, he claims that it gets stronger and stronger. Let's check this guy out. So they hired this guy named John Augustus Roebling, and they say, you know what? In order to eliminate this problem with the Lackawaxen River, we're going to ask you to build a canal viaduct over the Lackawaxen River, go down another half mile, and over the Delaware River, and actually 2 more up in New York State. The only one that still exists is the one across the Lackawaxen. Excuse me, across the Delaware.
Right.
The one across the Lackawaxen, you can still see the one abutment. Floods have washed the other abutments away. But if you get up to Lackawaxen, again, another side trip. Right next to the Roebling Bridge, 1/4 mile away, is the Zane Grey House. The Zane Grey House is at the confluence of the Lackawaxen and Delaware. It is operated by the National Park Service. It is the home where Zane Grey wrote most of his Western novels. Riders of the Purple Sage, so on and so forth. And Zane Grey, what was his original occupation?
Yes.
All right, you guys are good. I usually ask that, nobody knows. Good job. And his dentist chair is in that museum, by the way. So, another side trip, and right next to the Roebling Bridge, you know, food is always important to me, the Lackawaxen House. Great little restaurant, and if you play your cards right, you arrange for dinner at the Lackawaxen House. Well, first you do the Zane Grey, walk across the bridge, have dinner at the Lackawaxen House, but insist that you want to see the eagles flying up and down the Delaware. You can make arrangements. Yes.
And then if you want to see something else, if you walk from the Grey House to the Roebling Bridge, halfway on the Pennsylvania side is the tomb of the unknown Revolutionary War soldier from the Battle of Middlesing.
Battle of Middlesing. And Middlesing was on the other side of the river. He's absolutely right. And by the way, you have to walk across the Roebling Bridge, because you walk across on one side and come back on the other, because on the bridge, you know, one thing about the National Park Service, when they do things, they do it right. They have several very large placards describing exactly what happened with the aqueduct. Now remember, this is an aqueduct filled with water that went on top of the Delaware River. A lot of people have difficulty understanding that concept. The water was on top of the river. Why? Because they didn't want the lumber and the coal boats crashing into each other. So they have these placards there, and when you get to the New York side of the Delaware, last I knew you didn't have to have a passport. You might want to check that out. They actually have the gatehouse there, where up until the 1970s, there was a guy that owned the bridge who used to charge like $1.50 to go across the bridge. Well, what happened was some idiot in a very heavy truck, even though it was posted for 4 tons or whatever, he decides to drive this 20-ton truck across the bridge caves in. And at that time, it sat idle for 3 or 4 years. until finally our congressman at the time, Mr. McDade, said, you know what, we really need to revive that. He got money set aside, just as he did with Steamtown and so on, and we got the Rolling Bridge aqueduct was rebuilt. Some people didn't like it when it was rebuilt because they rebuilt it to its original specifications.
Right.
And that was, you had slant sides, and when you drive across the aqueduct, you cannot see in the river anymore because it was a canal and there was wood on the side to hold the water. Well, that's the price you pay for authenticity. And if you want to see the river, what you do is you get out and you park your car in the parking lot and you walk up on the bridge and you can walk across. It's a wonderful walk. And if you play your cards right, there are lots of eagles up there flying up and down. I've had the good fortune of seeing them a number of times. Yes?
Just a funny story about, after the gravity had closed, they gave a little town, I'm not sure, at Shahola, a car. And Shahola is a big recreation area. And
The Shahola Glen Amusement Park. I have a history of it right here.
okay, well, that's the one me and Ed went by. We went up and we found the car, but we couldn't figure out how it got down the bottom or how it got up the top.
Go on Google Shahola on your computer. And I'm going to, I have an article about it here if you want to read it. But if you Google it, you can find out.
We spent 2 days going up and down that mountain trying to figure out how the railroad got down and how it got up.
It's on the computer.
And it was on trestle. It was on a trestle
Okay.
that they did it. So we could not find any remains of an engine house.
Okay.
So Ed, knowing Ed, I'm sure you do.
I knew Dr. Steers, yep.
He went, and I was sitting in a restaurant having a cup of coffee, and he went knocking on people's doors. So he found a 97-year-old man who told him a turbine, they're saying turbine.
Yeah. Which
So,
was,
Ed said he couldn't understand where, so he got me, and we went out again by the creek that was over there. And sure enough, there's a great big pit that it ran, and the water ran in, and the turbine was on the bottom and pulled the car back up the top.
and going back to the D&H gravity as well, sometimes they operated by water, sometimes, they operated by turbine. There were different, by stationary steam engines. Let me mention one more thing before I forget. I need your help if you want to, not tonight, but contribute at some point. Pennsylvania Coal Company Gravity Railroad car. Remember I said I live in Hawley? I've been a member of the Hawley Library Board for almost 30 years now. If you've been in Hawley, right in front of the Hawley Library sits an original Pennsylvania Coal Company Gravity Railroad car. It's actually painted the wrong color, but that's a different story for another time. It's one of the passenger cars. And it is as plain as you can, there are just long wooden seats inside it. The good news is we own that car. That Pennsylvania Coal Company Gravity Railroad car, when Pennsylvania went out of existence in 1885, that coal went to the Shahola Glen Amusement Park for their gravity railroad. In 1909, that Pennsylvania Coal Company car came back to Hawley, still owned by the Pennsylvania Coal Company and its subsidiaries, later the Erie Railroad. In 1966, and we have the deed, the Erie-Lackawanna Railway Company deeded that Pennsylvania gravity car to the Hawley Library Association. That's the good news. It sat across Route 6 from where it is today without cover for many years. We brought it onto the library grounds in 1975 and built a roof, a shed on top of it. That's the last time anything was touched on that railroad car. I somehow got nominated as chairperson, I can't imagine why, to be in charge of the restoration of that car. We have architects who have looked at it, and we have a bill in my hands, I actually have it in there, of $29,000 to do all the work that needs to be done. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. I've already written 2 grants. I'm in the process of writing to our banks up there. But I may be actually coming over to Dunmore and Scranton at some point and saying, hey, this is a piece not just of Hawley history, but of northeastern Pennsylvania history. I am desperately afraid. The worst part is, one is the roof, not the roof of the car, but the roof overhead. In the last few storms, the shingles are just shot. Again, 75 is when the shingles were done, so you know what happens 35 years later to those shingles. The other thing that's in really bad shape, years ago, 75, we put plexiglass windows in. Well, kids being kids, many of those windows have been punched out. My biggest fear is some kid, I shouldn't blame it on kids, but somebody's going to take and throw a match in there someday, and that car will be gone forever. So we're trying to work with Mesco Glass, with whomever, to really fix this up in such a way that, one, vandalism cannot be done, and 2, to restore it to its original glory. And this was really a worker's car. In comparison to, and again, if you've been in the Wayne County Historical Society in Homestead, they have a wonderful car called the Eclipse? The Eclipse, which was a Delaware and Hudson Canal Company business car, highfalutin car with velour seats and everything else. It is beautiful. I'd go for a ride in that tomorrow if they let me. That's in beautiful shape, and it's indoors. Our car is outdoors where it belongs. It was a worker's car. It was a car that went back and forth between Dunmore and Hawley, and we're looking for $30,000. So if anybody wants to write a check, you can make life really easy for me here tonight. Just $30,000, Hawley Library, and we're done. Yes?
I haven't looked at the other one in some time, but the one that Mayoff Park was also.
It was. You're right. And I haven't looked at it lately, but I'm going to look at it. But ours is in really bad shape.
There's still lots and lots of them around using the sheds and the.
Yeah.
One thing I do when I go patrol, I often walk down the streets, I've identified a number around Raleigh. I think we use for sheds
Oh,
and different things, so there are cars around there.
okay.
And we've identified 42 around Crystal Lake and Park.
Have you really? That many? Wow.
They're gravity, and we have them on a disc.
Oh, okay.
And I think he's up to like 55 now that he's identified.
That's great.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
That's a general overview. Delaware and Hudson Canal Company and Gravity Railroads. It all surrounds coal. I just want to mention a couple of things. And I have a couple of videos. My time is your time. It's a small TV and this is a big audience, so that's why I've done more talking. But I have a wonderful video when the Casey Highway was built. They had to disturb some of the D&H gravity railroad lines. So they had to do some mitigation factors. One of the mitigation factors was a half-hour, 45-minute video on the gravity. It's very well done. It's available for purchase at the Wayne County Historical Society. Separate note, one of my favorite books, since my heritage, and I suspect most of you, it's coal mining. You know, I was a school principal for 34 years, and I had a reputation for better or worse. I always said to my staff, I may wear a shirt and tie, and I may wear a white shirt, but I said, I was raised in coal country, and I'm a blue-collar worker. And all I ever asked of my staff was a day's work for a day's pay. And my staff knew if they did their job, they never had to worry. But they also knew if they didn't do their job, I was coming after them. And I don't mean that in a mean or difficult way. All I ever wanted people to do was to do their work. My grandfather worked in the coal mines, my grandfather Curtis. And by the way, Joe and I are related by marriage. His wife is a Curtis, and my mother was a Curtis. And obviously my grandparents were Curtis. My grandfather often told me the story. His name was Harry